Welcome to OSF101. Today we're going to go over a basic introduction to OSF. If you have questions now or at any point, feel free to use the Zoom Q&A. If you have questions after this webinar, we have an actual human person that answers email at contact@cos.io. We would love to hear from you, whether those are problems or suggestions or just things related to open science and OSF that you'd like to discuss with the center. You can send everything to that one email address, contact@cos.io. So I work at the Center for Open Science. That's the cos.io part of the contact email. We are a nonprofit run out of Charlottesville, Virginia. I'd be remiss if I did not mention that as a nonprofit, we are always welcoming for support from the community, whether that takes the form of charitable donations, examining the tools and services that we have to offer, perhaps discussing them in your department or online. We're here to help, and we're just trying to spread the word. With that said, our mission is specifically to increase the openness, reproducibility, and integrity of scientific research. We say science in a lot of things. It's in the mission statement, it's in our name. What we actually mean is research writ broadly. Whatever your field, whatever your discipline, our tools are designed to be discipline agnostic, and we want to try and help. The biggest thing that we build and maintain is the Open Science Framework, which we just call OSF. This is a free and open source tool. As I mentioned, all disciplines are welcome. This is what we're going to be digging into today. You can always access it at osf.io, and this is completely free service available to researchers as part of our nonprofit mission. There are no special hidden accounts. There are no paid features. This is an open and free service. So the way that OSF is designed is we're trying to make it easy to practice open and reproducible research practices at all stages of the research lifecycle. The research lifecycle is long, and there are many steps throughout it. What most often comes up in terms of discussions of open science and reproducible practice is a lot of focus at the very end. Once it comes time to publish a report, people start engaging with the idea of what other materials should we share, how should we spread this knowledge more widely. That can be time-consuming and sort of error-prone, as anyone who has spent hours in the middle of the night digging through email chains to try and find versions of files that were sent around months ago can readily attest. The goal of OSF and a lot of the methodology and practice suggestions that we make is to move some of that work earlier in the process so that it can happen more easily and more efficiently. First thing that we're going to do is just take a look at an example project. This is a live research project that's available on OSF. So let me just load up this project here. So this was a paper put together. You can see the DOI and the preprint are prominently listed on the page. What we have here is a lot of information about the project. We start off with the title and date. We've got a list of contributors here, some information about when the project was actually created and when it was last updated. There's information here in the wiki about the actual stimuli that were available, as well as the preprint that I mentioned. If we scroll down, there are some files made available as part of this, including some Github connections here. We'll look at all of these different capabilities in more detail. Down here, there's a list of all the activity taking place on this project. So you can see what happened when it was last updated. It looks like they were connecting the preprint. We've got some different sections of the project over here under this components tool, including the stimuli and some various experiment data. And up here, if we expand this, we've actually got a citation widget that presents all of the basic information about this project in a number of easy citation formats for quick reuse. So this is just an example of what researchers are doing on OSF. We're going to go ahead and now create our own example project so that you can see how to build up this kind of a structure and what considerations go into it as you design your own projects. So I'm just going to go to sign in and connect here. Some of you may, if you don't already have OSF accounts, or even if you do, you may have an institution. Perhaps you work at one of the, I think, a few dozen OSF institutions. You can also sign in directly through your institution that way. Check on that list. If this is the first you've heard about it, it may not be relevant to you, but it's a very handy time saver. As well as you can sign in with an ORCID ID, which, independent of all of this, strongly encourage you to get. So I'm just going to sign in with my OSF account here. And that's going to take me to, click on OSF Home. Here's my project dashboard. When you first log in, if you just go to osf.io and click sign in, it brings you straight to this dashboard. What this is a list of all of your projects and your project components arranged in order of what has most recently been edited, what is being changed most recently. So this is just an easy way to quickly get back to the things that you were most recently working on, or in a collaborative setting, this allows you to easily see what sections of your projects your collaborators have been recently working on as well. For this webinar, we're just going to create a new project. So I'm going to hit the green Create New Project button. And then I get the option to put in a title for my project. Projects on OSF can be basically anything. I'm going to show you what a project structure looks like for an individual research paper, much like the example we just looked at. We can also easily create structures for an entire lab or line of research, or for large multi-site sort of complex projects. We have some example projects that showcase those different features and structures. If anyone is interested, you can search for OSF example projects, or I can share some links a little later. So I'm just going to give this one a descriptive name. This one's going to be political science related, because those are the example materials I have. And then I'll hit create. Great, so I can either keep working here and make some more projects, or go to the new project, which I'm going to do. All right, so now we've created a new project on OSF. It has all of the same basic tools available that we saw used in that example public research project. Because OSF is designed to be discipline agnostic, we don't create a structure that we think is going to be useful in your particular research collaborations. We give you these basic tools so that you can build up whatever structure is most useful for your existing workflows and partnerships. So up at the top, we have the basic project name. If I wanted to change that, I could just click on it and change whatever I want in the field here. I forgot to capitalize income. So I'll go ahead and make that little change. We have the list of contributors, which is just me at the moment. Some basic information about when the project was created. I can add a description or a license to my project. The first big tool on the page is the Wiki. The Wiki is a collaborative text editing space. You can use this in any number of different ways. You can have a shared to-do list or the sort of abstract from a paper. This can be just sort of a project README space to help direct people around the rest of the project, whether that's you or your contributors or the public, should you make any of this public. It's important to note at the very beginning that everything on OSF is private by default, every project that you create. So we've got a make public button up here and a private button. At the moment, I'm the only one that can access this. So anything that I add to the wiki is going to be for my internal organizational practices. If I want to make this public later, then I can always change what's in the wiki to better suit that wider audience. Underneath the wiki, we have a section for files. This is where I can add and interact with files on OSF. You can add any type of file that you want to OSF. We actually render a significant number of them directly in the browser so that you can see the contents of all of the files on your project without having to download all of them and interact with them locally. That extends from everything, including common Office documents, all the way through to .stl 3D renderings, and some other much more complex file types that you may not have ready viewers installed for on, say, your phone if you're trying to identify a file to send to a contributor. We try and make it as easy as possible to just interact with everything directly through the site. The only limit on files for OSF is that each individual file you add has to be 5 GB or less. There is no restriction on file type. There is no restriction on the total amount of storage that you can use, either within a project or across OSF. The only restriction is that each individual file has to be 5 GB or less. Over on the other side of the page, we have a recent activity widget. Here, this tracks everything basically that can be tracked about a project. So this shows when it was created. It shows that I changed the title. This is going to be a great sort of rolling log of everything that I and my contributors do on this project so that we can see exactly what changed, when, and who changed it. We have some tags that we can use up here to enhance discoverability should we make this public. We have a component section. Components are the primary way that you add logical structure to your OSF project. And we're going to be creating some of those in just a second. And as we saw, there is a citation widget to make this page very easy to cite by other people, so that if I choose to share this, I can easily get credit for the work I'm making public. As I mentioned, there's a Make Public button because everything is private by default. I also like to point out the sort of invisible feature of this page, which is the address. Each project, as well as each component in a project and all files in a project, gets a unique 5-character, we call it a GUID, for globally unique identifier. That's the part that comes after osf.io in the address. So all of these things have very short permanent addresses that will always uniquely identify this particular project or a particular component or a particular file. And that's just to make it really easy to direct people to exactly which portions of a project you want to show them, whether that's just for coordination purposes while you're collaborating privately, or if you choose to make any of this public later on, it gives you some really short addresses that you can use in a CV or a lab website, or even just directly in figure captions to direct people to the specific data set or the specific analyses that created that particular chart in a publication. They're short and easy to use, and it's sort of an invisible feature. So I just take a second to highlight that. So to start with, I'm just going to add some logical structure to this project, try and build out a structured workspace. I'm going to start by adding a couple of components here. So if I hit Add Component, I have the chance to put in another title here. This one's just going to be my data component. And I'll hit Create. And keep working here so that I can create another component. This one's going to be for materials. And create. I'll keep working here. So now I have a couple basic components that I can use to organize my material and data files and just keep everything sort of neatly arranged. If we take a look inside the data component, you can get to that just by clicking on the name. Now we're inside the data component, and there are a couple things that you're likely to notice. The first is that this page looks almost exactly the same as the main project page. Components have all of the same tools and capabilities as the project page itself. The only real indicators that you have that you're inside a component are up here above the component name. You can see the main project name in the top left. And above that, on this main project toolbar, there's a little up left arrow in the top left corner. Both that and the project name allow you to get back up one level to the main project page. Importantly, components can have their own components. You can have components within components within components, as many levels as you need to create a structure that fits your particular research needs. Components can also have different settings than the main project for things like public and private. So you can make just your data component public and not have to make the entire project public, or just your materials component public and not have to make the rest of your data and project public. Components can also have different contributors. And so I'll go ahead and click on the main project name and show you how we can add some contributors to this project. At the moment, it's just me. And I would like this to be a collaborative project. If this was just for my own private research note organization, I may not want to add anyone. There's no obligation to make any of this collaborative or make any of this public. We've just designed it to be as easy to do those things as possible for you. So if I want to add some more people to this project, I'm going to go up to the Contributors button on the main project toolbar. And here you can see I'm the only contributor. And then I'm going to hit Add here and bring in a couple of my coworkers. So here I've got a search by name option. For privacy and spam protection reasons, you can't search directly by email address. So you need to search for the names of your colleagues. In this case, I'm going to add Courtney. And you can see it automatically lists the number of projects we have in common. It also lists information from Courtney's OSF profile. Both of those are great ways to help sort through the contributors that show up here if you're working with people that have relatively common names. There aren't very many Courtney Soderbergs out there, so she's relatively easy to find on OSF. So I'm going to click the big Add Contributor button next to her profile, and then I'm just going to search for another one at the same time. I'll add David here, and again, I'm going to click the big green button next to his picture. Once I've found the people that I want to add, I've got a couple of different important decisions to make. The first here is this bibliographic contributor box, which is checked by default, which means that by default, when I add them, they will show up in sort of the bibliography. What this means is, do I want these people to be publicly visible on the project page as contributors, and do I want them to appear in the citation? Because this is all for a private project, this distinction may not matter as much at the moment, but if we're designing with an intent towards making any of this public later on, this is a very useful feature to have. If I uncheck the bibliographic contributor box, they'll still have the same rights and permissions. They just won't show up publicly as a contributor to that. So whatever the norms for appearing in a citation and an author's list are in your particular field, that's what guides the sort of bibliographic contributor settings here. If you're working with graduate students who aren't making a significant enough contribution to appear in the author's list, or perhaps you're just dealing with some administrative staff that need access to expense reporting or other things, and you want to bring them into your OSF project, but not have them appear as contributors to the research outputs. You can just uncheck bibliographic contributor. What rights and permissions these new contributors have depend on this second list here, which is the list of permissions available. There are three main permission settings in OSF: read, read-write, which is the default, and administrator. If you ever need a refresher in what the difference between those are, you can hover over the little question mark in a black circle, and it will spell that out for you. This is generally true across OSF. If you see a little question mark in a black circle and hover over it, hopefully it will give you some useful information. So the different options are read-only, which just allows people access to the project because this is a public. This is not a public project. The only way that people are going to be able to gain access to it is if I actively add them as contributors. The default level, which is the next one, is read-write. That allows them not only to access the project, but to make changes to it. So they can edit files, they can add and delete content, they can make new sections, etc. The highest level of permissions is administrator. This is what you start out as when you create a new project. This allows you to do everything that a read-write user can do, and also to make decisions about whether something should be shared on a project. So administrators are the only ones that can decide to make part of a project public. Administrators are also the only ones that can add other contributors or change the permissions that existing contributors have. So by default, we just set it to read-write so that you have to make a conscious choice to add other administrators if you want them to be able to make things public or to add and manage contributors on a project. I'm going to leave both of my contributors here as just read-write and then click Next. What I get here is a list of all of the components in the project. As I mentioned, components can have different settings from the main project page. So they can be independently made public or private. They can also have different contributors, and contributors can have different permissions in different sections. So if you're working with someone who is just uploading data, they may need read and write access to the data component, but you can give them just read access to the materials component. Or perhaps they don't need access to the materials component at all, and then you would just add them to the data component. I'm going to go ahead and add both of my contributors to all of these components and hit Add. And so it's adding them to those different sections of the project. Here you can see all three of us are listed. And if I go back to the main project by hitting the name in the project toolbar, you can also see that they appear in the list of contributors under both of my components. We had that handy list where we could just select the components when adding contributors because we had those components already on the project when we added the contributors. If we want to add some additional sections to this project, so if I go back to add component, and this time I'm going to add an analysis scripts component. This first option here, add contributors from, and then the name of my main project. What I'm going to do is click that, and that is going to pull in all of my contributors at this main project level and give them the same permissions to the new component. So depending on which order you do things, we try and make it easy to manage the contributors to each independent section of the project. So if I hit create now and keep working here, you'll see that the new component has been created and that all three of us are there. If I add a component without checking that, then by default, I'm the only one that has access to it because I'm the one that created it, and I'd have to go back through in contributors and add those contributors inside that new component. So we have a project structure now with some different areas that we can organize our research materials. I'm also going to go ahead and add some information about just what exactly we're trying to research here so that it's easy for us to distinguish the different topics that we have going and the different attempts we have to answer some of these common questions. I'm going to do that in the wiki, and I'm going to get to the wiki here by clicking on this little box with the arrow next to it in the wiki section. That brings us to the wiki tool. There are a couple sections of this page. In the middle here is a preview, which is empty because there's nothing in the wiki yet. And over here on the right-hand side is the actual wiki text area. This is a plain text area where we can add our research questions and sample size planning, for instance. This is plain text, but if you want some additional formatting, we use a plain text formatting convention called Markdown. If you know Markdown, you can feel free to just start using it. If you don't know Markdown, you don't have to learn Markdown in order to use the wiki. This toolbar up at the top will handle all of your basic formatting needs. So if I want my research question, for instance, to be in bold, I can just click the bold button here. And you can see in the preview that is now bold. If I want to remove that bold, I just hit it again. I mentioned that it's Markdown because I think Markdown is an interesting thing to learn, but mostly because I want you to not get confused if you use the formatting bar and then suddenly these asterisks start appearing around your text. That's just how Markdown indicates bold in this case. We can also create lists and other kinds of formatting. The important part about the wiki, perhaps the most important part about the wiki, is once you have made a change, you need to scroll down to the big green save button at the bottom. I cannot emphasize enough the big green save button at the bottom. So I'll just hit save here, and now my edit box has disappeared. And my preview shows the actual contents of the wiki. If I want to get back and make additional changes to the wiki, I go up to the top right-hand corner here, and I can hit edit. And perhaps I want to add a third list item here. and then I will scroll down again to the big green Save button at the bottom. So the wiki is a very flexible and useful tool in terms of general knowledge collection and organization around a project. One of the really powerful things that it does, if we click back on the main project name in the project toolbar, we can see that the first section of a wiki is directly included on this main project page. So that makes it really powerful in terms of both contextualizing what it is that you're trying to do in this particular project or on a particular component, as well as just helping people navigate the rest of the project because it's prominently displayed and you can use whatever sort of links you want to help people navigate around. So however you plan to use the wiki, I strongly encourage you to try it out and see how useful it is to have that kind of a signpost right at the top of your project section. Okay, so just in terms of helping people navigate around a project, a new feature that we've recently implemented, if I go to my data component again, so now we're inside the data component. I mentioned that you can have a description for your project. You can also have descriptions for different components. So here, if I add in just a little description about what exactly this data is and hit save. If we go back up to the main project, just click on the project name there, you can see over in the list of components that this description is directly included under the list of contributors for that data component. So in addition to the wiki, having descriptions attached to your different components can really aid in navigating, especially if you build more complex or multi-level project structures. It's always better to have strong cues about where you're going and what these materials are. So encourage both wiki and description use for those purposes. Okay, so we've got a project structure now. We've got a little bit of information about what we want to actually do in this project. And we've added some contributors. So this is a genuinely collaborative, organized research space. It's still private. Only my contributors and I have access to it. And you are seeing it through my screen. At this point, we're going to try and actually add some content to this by uploading some files. Uploading files to OSF is pretty straightforward. You can see down in this file section on the left-hand side, the main project has an OSF storage icon underneath it. And then we have this sort of hierarchical list of the different components, each of which also has an OSF storage underneath it. In order to add things to the project, you just want to interact with the OSF storage for whichever section of the project you want to add things. So if I go to the main project OSF storage and click on it, you can see a bunch of buttons have popped up at the top. One is just an upload button. So if I go to my example materials, I can just select all of them and hit open. And it will upload all of those in parallel and give me a little message when they have been successfully updated. There we go. So now I've added all of these files to OSF, but ideally I'm going to want to use the project structure that I created to organize and sort of administer these different files. That means I need to now move them into the different components. Moving files on OSF is really straightforward. You can just click on them and drag. So I've got my questionnaire here. That's a material. I'm going to drag that to the OSF storage under materials. I've got two R scripts here for my analysis. I'm just going to Control select both of those, or just do it one at a time. Drag down my 2 analyses scripts, and then I'm going to grab all of my data files and move them into data. So now I've organized all of my files in the relevant sections. Having them in components like that makes it really easy to administer who has access to what. So that graduate student I mentioned who's going to be interacting with the data, they only need to be a contributor on the data section. They're not going to have access to the questionnaire or the analyses files. I could also have some researchers on the team who are just working on the analysis files, and they can just be contributors on that particular analysis script component and not need access to the data, which perhaps they would need to go through some additional clearance to get. So adding files to OSF is pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, you can add any file type, and the only limit is that each of these individual files needs to be 5 gigabytes or less. If we look at a couple of them, you can see that we render them directly in the browser, as I mentioned. I'm a particular fan of our CSV view, which allows you to actually sort and search through the different contents of CSV files. If we click on the data dictionary, which is a Microsoft Word file, you can see that we render this directly in the browser as well, though that takes a second longer than the CSVs. Each of these files also has its own unique GUID, which is that 5-character string in the URL I mentioned. So I can directly link to any of these different files with a unique permanent identifier. I go back up to the main project. One of the things that we all know about research is that the materials and the data and everything else that we're dealing with are not static. They're going to change over time. And one of the big things that we advocate for is the use of version control. So everything on OSF is version controlled automatically. That means that we keep every copy of every file that is uploaded to OSF. There are a couple of different ways that you can, there are a couple of different ways that you can interact with those files. The first is that plain text files, so for instance, our R files are plain text files, and they're going to be able to be edited directly through OSF. So if I click on my analysis file, it's going to display that here with some helpful syntax highlighting for the R language. Just like in the wiki, if I click edit, I get the contents of that file in a little plain text box, and I can just add in a comment that I'm loading libraries and click on the big green save button at the bottom. So now my comment is in the main file. Since OSF keeps every version of these files, I can actually just click on the revisions button up by the edit one in the top right corner. And what I get is a list of both versions of this file that have existed on OSF. I've got the exact date that they were made, who made the changes. I've got a download button for each of them. And if I want to just view the old versions, I can actually click on the version ID, which is a link to that version of the file. So here's the version without the comments. If I go back to revisions, I can click on the second one. And now you can see the version with the comment at the top. By default, OSF will always show the most recent version of every file. So this version 2 is what people are going to get to if they just click on the file name at any point after it's been created. So plain text files, that's pretty straightforward. If you have more complicated files on your project, for instance, if you have one of those data dictionaries in Microsoft Word, you can't edit the file directly through OSF. What you do is you edit it on your main machine the same way that you created the file. So I'm just gonna make a change locally and then hit save. And so I'm gonna save it with the exact same file name. And if I go back here to OSF storage, this is the OSF storage under data. So this is where the data dictionary file currently lives. And if I hit upload and add my newly changed data dictionary, because I'm adding a file with the same name to the same section of OSF, OSF recognizes that this is a new version of the file. So you can see here that this is version 2, and you can see the make a change that I added to the top of this file. If I click on revisions, we can get back to the list of versions, and we can look at the original version of this file without my make a change comment up at the top. So whatever type of file you have, as long as you have the capability to edit it, you can just save it and add new versions to OSF. The goal here is to avoid using file names as an ad hoc version control system. It's just an error-prone and sort of inefficient method. Far better to have a tool, whether that's OSF or any other tool of your choice, that will automatically manage these versions for you. So if we click back up to the main project page, that's how you upload and manage versions of files on OSF. You may already have tools that you're using to store your data or to manage version control for that data over time. One of the big advantages of OSF is that we are designed to integrate with as many of those different tools as possible so that you can keep using the tools that you already know or that you may be required to use and still get a lot of the benefits of you using OSF. And the way that you do that is through the Addons tool. Addons is right in the main project toolbar. So if I click Addons, you can see the list of services that we currently integrate with. There are a number of direct data storage services like Dataverse and Google Drive and Dropbox. There are some version control specific ones like GitLab and GitHub and Bitbucket, and a couple of different citation managers. You can use Zotero and Mendeley and integrate those directly here. I'm going to go ahead and connect a Google Drive. So if I click on Enable next to Google Drive, what I get is a list of terms. This spells out everything that's possible to do when I connect Google Drive and OSF. I'm building a bridge between these two services, and what it's possible to do over that bridge is generally just determined by what, in this case, Google Drive will allow us to do on your behalf. So in this case, it spells out that I can add and update files on both sides, so that I can add files to my Google Drive and they will immediately show up in the portion of my OSF project where I've connected them. Similarly, I can add files through OSF and they will appear in my Google Drive. And for Google Drive, at least, that is also true for deleting files. I can do so on either side. So this is an important list of terms to read if you're going to connect any add-ons. It's different for each add-on service that you connect. I'm going to hit confirm here. And now I have a configure add-on section here where I can import my account, which just is a confirmation. And then I have the ability to select my different Google Drive folders. I'm going to pick one folder out of my Google Drive list. It's important to know that this is my full list of Google Drive folders. You are only seeing it now because you're actually looking at my screen. My contributors on this project are not going to see this list. They're not going to know if I've got thousands of folders for cat videos or whatever else I'm using Google Drive for. They're only going to see the individual folder that I'm actively selecting here. So if I hit save, and now I go back to my main project page here, you can see in files that in addition to the OSF storage, I have a Google Drive storage. I don't actually have any files in that Google Drive folder, as it turns out. So if I just go ahead and drag one of my analysis scripts up to that Google Drive folder, that script is now on Google Drive. It is not in my OSF storage for analysis scripts anymore. It has actively moved over to my Google Drive. And if I were to load up Google Drive, you would see it in that folder. So that just to emphasize that these really are two different services, but you can seamlessly move things back and forth. If we look at that file, even though it's hosted on Google Drive, that's where it actively lives, we can still view it through OSF. So even for files that are actively stored on another service, we will still render them for you. We still maintain the permanent unique GUIDs for each file. So this can be a very convenient way to get short IDs for files on other services. You can still see the different revisions for it. As many of the benefits as we can give you of OSF, even though the file is actually living on Google Drive. That's how you can create a structured project, add some information about it to the wiki and to the descriptions for different components, add and manage files as they change, either directly through OSF or one of the companion services that you can connect through an add-on. All of this is done completely privately. If you choose to make it public, the process for that is you click on the Make Public button, and you can do that at the main project page or in one of the individual components if you just want to make that component public. If I hit Make Public here, I get a warning that I'm going to put things on the internet and that I should take a second and make sure that I want to do that. This is actually a great warning because I'm going to hit cancel. You may have noticed that inside my data component, I have a file called raw data. I don't actually want to share the raw data file for this project. So what I'm going to do here is create another component for it. And I'm just going to call this one raw data. I'm going to hit the Add Contributors button again because I want my contributors from the project to have access to it. I just don't want to make this file public. So I'll hit Create and keep working here so that I can just drag my raw data file down to the OSF storage for raw data. So that is now moved out of my main data component and into this raw data subcomponent. If I go back up to the main project page, now I can click the Make Public button with confidence because I know that that raw data file is in its own separate component. So if I hit Continue here, you can see that I get now a list of all of the different components. And again, each of these components has its own separate ability to be public or private. So I could make all of these private and then just publish my analysis scripts. I could make all of this public. In this case, I'm going to make everything public except my raw data component. So that will remain private to my contributors and I. So if I hit continue here, it gives me a list of all of the components that I'm going to be making public so that I can confirm. This is a great reason to use nice descriptive names. So I hit confirm. And now my make public button has been replaced by a make private button, and the little lock icons next to my different components have come off. If we go to the data component, you can see that the lock is still there for the raw data component. So only my contributors and I will have access to that, even though this main project page and all of these other 3 components are now publicly available. Because they're publicly available, you can get to them now. You could get to them through the GUID, the unique URL for the project. You could go to OSF search and search for them that way. You can get to search from the main toolbar at the very top of the screen. Everything that is publicly available on OSF is also going to get indexed by Google. So this will relatively quickly be added into the main Google index for the web, which can make it very easy to find things. If I go ahead and go to Google and search for Daniel Lockins effect size, you can see that his OSF project relating to effect sizes is actually one of his top links. So this is his public project. He has used some tags here to help make this project more discoverable. Those are used both by Google and by our internal search. And because this is publicly available, there are a couple of additional features that are relevant. If you click on the analytics page, the analytics tool in the main project toolbar, you can see the internal OSF connections to this. So people may have linked to this project or actually made copies of it. You can also see the public activity from the last 30 days. So these are the number of visits and when, as well as how people got here in the top refers section. There's a section on which pages are most popular, which is just a way to help show the concrete impact that your work continues to have over the course of its public lifetime. This project was actually made public about 5 years ago, and you can see that this is just the last 30 days of activity. So this is just a great indicator of the continued interest that people have in this work, and that you can continue using this. So I've just clicked on the files page up here, where you also get a list of the total downloads for the files related to this project. And so you can see his preprint has been downloaded some 6,000 times, and each of the supplemental calculation sheets that he's provided has also been downloaded thousands of times. So great concrete indicators of continuing effect of your work. So go back to our project page. One of the other great features when you make something public is that a new button appears inside the main project sort of biography information over here. There's now a Create DOI button. Any public project or component on OSF can get a free DOI. We're big fans of the very short permanent URLs, but if you need a DOI for your particular discipline or reference needs, when you make something public on the OSF, you can get that for free. Thank you very much for attending. If you have questions at any point, feel free to email contact@cos.io. All right, everyone, have a great day.